Mariam Youssef was the kind of woman people admired. A devoted mother, a respected schoolteacher, and a woman of strong faith, she carried herself with grace and dignity. At 38, she had built a life centered around her only son, 16-year-old Khalid. To those in their Lagos neighborhood, Mariam was the ideal mother, strict but loving, ensuring Khalid grew up disciplined and well-mannered. She attended Friday prayers regularly, always dressed modestly, and frequently spoke about morality and tradition. She had raised Khalid alone since the sudden death of her husband, Ibrahim, 5 years earlier. The tragedy had been devastating, but Mariam had persevered, determined to give Khalid a good life. Khalid was a bright and ambitious boy. He excelled in school, especially in science and mathematics, and dreamed of studying abroad one day. His teachers often praised him for his intelligence, and his friends admired his easygoing nature. He was well-liked, the kind of son any mother would be proud of. But beneath Mariam's perfect image, she hid a secret, a dangerous one. For over a year, she had been in a secret relationship with a woman named Adana, a businesswoman in her early 40s. Adana was confident, independent, and charismatic. She and Mariam had met at a teacher's conference, and their connection had been instant. What started as casual conversations turned into deep, intimate feelings, something Mariam had never experienced before, even in her marriage. But in Nigeria, such a relationship was not just frowned upon. It was illegal. The risks were enormous. If anyone found out, Mariam could lose her job, be shunned by her community, and even face legal consequences. That fear kept her cautious, forcing her to live a double life. Whenever Adana visited, it was always in secrecy. They met only when Khalid was away at school or visiting friends. Mariam was careful, locking doors, closing curtains, and ensuring no one suspected anything. But no matter how careful she was, secrets had a way of unraveling. And soon, hers would come crashing down in the most tragic way possible. It was a humid Friday evening, the kind that made the air thick and heavy in Lagos. Mariam had planned everything carefully. Khalid had gone to visit his best friend, Sadiq, and wasn't expected back until late. This was one of the rare nights she could be with Adana without the constant fear of being caught. The house was dimly lit, the scent of burning incense filling the air. Mariam and Adana sat close together on the couch, their laughter soft and intimate. It was these stolen moments that made all the secrecy worth it. But then the front door creaked open. Mariam's blood ran cold. Khalid stood in the doorway, his school bag slung over one shoulder, his face frozen in shock. He had come home early, something neither Mariam nor Adana had expected. His wide, disbelieving eyes moved from his mother to Adana. The way they were sitting, the closeness between them, it told him everything. Silence. Then, Khalid dropped his bag on the floor with a thud. "Mama, what is this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words felt like a slap. Mariam's throat went dry. She struggled to find words, but nothing came. Adana instinctively pulled away, sensing the danger of the situation. Khalid took a step back. His mother, the woman who had always preached about morality, faith, and righteousness, was living a lie, a forbidden one. His face twisted in anger and betrayal. This is haram, he spat, his voice shaking. "Khalid, please." Mariam finally found her voice, reaching out to him. "It's not what you think." But it was too late. He had seen enough. Without another word, Khalid turned and stormed out of the house. Mariam rushed after him, but by the time she reached the doorstep, he was gone, swallowed by the dark streets. Panic gripped her chest. What if he told someone? What if he never came back? Behind her, Adana stood, her face tense with worry. "Mariam, what are we going to do?" Mariam didn't answer. She had spent years protecting her secret. But now, the person she loved most in the world had discovered the truth. And she had no idea what he would do next. Khalid didn't come home that night. Mariam barely slept, pacing the house, her stomach twisted in knots. Every passing hour without a sign of him deepened her panic. Where had he gone? Who was he with? Had he already told someone? By morning, she found him sitting on the front steps, his school bag beside him. His face was hardened, his eyes distant. He looked like a stranger. Mariam exhaled in relief and rushed to him. Khalid, where have you been? You scared me. Khalid didn't respond immediately. He stood up and brushed past her into the house, dropping his bag on the floor. Mariam followed him, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Talk to me, Khalid. He turned around sharply, his face filled with fury. What do you want me to say, Mama? That I'm okay with this? That I didn't see what I saw? His voice was sharp, accusing. Mariam swallowed hard. I never meant for you to find out this way. You weren't supposed to find out at all, right? He shot back. That's why you've been sneaking around. Lying to me. Lying to everyone. Mariam stepped closer, trying to reach him. Khalid, listen to me. This doesn't change who I am. I am still your mother. The same person who has always loved you. Khalid let out a bitter laugh. No, you're not the same. You're a liar. You're a hypocrite. His eyes burned with hurt. You talk about faith, about being righteous. But look at you. If people knew the truth, they'd never respect you again. Mariam flinched at his words. She had feared this reaction, but hearing it from her own son crushed her. I can explain. You can't explain this. Khalid interrupted. Do you even know what could happen if people find out? You could go to prison, Mama. You could be killed. Mariam felt a lump in her throat. She had spent years living in fear of exposure, but nothing terrified her more than the thought of her own son hating her. Please, Khalid, she begged, her voice breaking. I need you to understand. I need you to keep this between us. Khalid's expression darkened. You want me to lie for you? Mariam hesitated. I want you to protect me. Khalid shook his head, his fists clenching. You don't deserve protection. You deserve to be exposed. Mariam's breath caught in her chest. A cold dread washed over her as she saw the determination in his eyes. If Khalid told someone, her entire life would come crashing down. She had to do something, and fast. Mariam sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her chair. Khalid had barely spoken to her since their confrontation earlier that day. He had locked himself in his room, refusing to eat, refusing to even look at her. The silence in the house felt suffocating. Her mind raced with fear. What if he told someone? What if he went to the mosque and confessed to an imam? What if he told his teachers or his friends? A scandal like this wouldn't just ruin her reputation. It could destroy her entire life. She had spent years building an image of a devoted mother and a pious woman. She would lose her job. Her family would disown her. And in a society where such secrets were met with outrage, she could even be arrested or worse. And Adana? She had already distanced herself. She had warned Mariam that Khalid would be a problem, that a teenage boy wouldn't understand or keep quiet. But Mariam had refused to believe her. Now she had no choice. She had to stop him before it was too late. Late that night, Mariam stood outside Khalid's bedroom door, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. She knocked softly. Khalid? Please let me in, she pleaded. No response. She turned the knob. It wasn't locked. She stepped inside and saw her son lying on the bed, his back turned to her. His body was still, his breathing slow. He had fallen asleep. Mariam's eyes welled with tears as she looked at him. This was her child. The boy she had carried for 9 months, nursed through fevers, held through nightmares. She had loved him more than anything. But now he was her greatest threat. She stepped closer, her hands shaking. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her. But in her mind, she convinced herself it was the only way. If Khalid exposed her, she would lose everything. She would lose herself. Carefully, she picked up a pillow from the bed. She hovered over him, staring at his peaceful face. He looked so much like his father in this moment, his features soft in sleep. A sob caught in her throat. I'm sorry, my son, she whispered. Then, with one deep breath, she pressed the pillow over his face. Khalid's body jolted awake. He struggled, his hands clawing at her arms. His muffled cries filled the room as his legs kicked wildly. Mariam squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to hold on, to not let go. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she felt his resistance weaken. His thrashing slowed. His fingers loosened their grip. And then silence. She pulled the pillow away, gasping for air, her entire body trembling. Khalid lay motionless, his face pale, his lips slightly parted. His eyes, once full of life, were now empty. Mariam stumbled back, her hands covering her mouth. The weight of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had killed her own son. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. But she knew one thing. She had to hide the truth. Wiping her tears, she took deep breaths and forced herself to act. She smoothed Khalid's clothes, placing his hands neatly at his sides. She sat beside his bed, rubbing her face to make her eyes look swollen, as if she had been crying over his sudden death. Then, she picked up her phone and dialed. When the neighbors arrived minutes later, they found Mariam weeping over Khalid's lifeless body. He just wouldn't wake up, she sobbed. I don't know what happened. The community mourned with her, believing the boy had died in his sleep. The doctors found no immediate signs of foul play, and given the lack of an autopsy request, his death was ruled as natural. Khalid was buried within 24 hours. Mariam stood by his grave, surrounded by mourners who offered their condolences, their prayers, their support. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew the monster she had become. The graveyard was silent except for the whispers of prayers and the sound of shovels moving dirt. Mariam stood motionless, her face streaked with tears, her hands clasped together as if in deep grief. Around her, mourners wept for Khalid, the bright young boy taken too soon. No one suspected a thing. Neighbors consoled her, holding her as she collapsed in sorrow. Family members murmured blessings for her strength. The imam recited prayers, speaking of fate and how God's will was unquestionable. Mariam played her role perfectly. She was the grieving mother, the woman who had lost her only son in his sleep. No one questioned why she didn't demand an autopsy. No one noticed how tightly she clenched her hands to stop them from shaking. But the real test wasn't the burial. It was what came after. The first person to show suspicion was Sadiq, Khalid's best friend. He arrived at the house 3 days after the funeral, his eyes swollen from crying. "Auntie, I just don't understand," he said, sitting across from Mariam. "Khalid was fine the last time I saw him. He wasn't sick. How could he just die?" Mariam forced a sad smile. "Sometimes these things happen, my dear. Allah gives and takes as he wills." Sadiq nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't leave her face. "Did he say anything to you that night? Did he seem different?" Mariam's heart pounded. Did Khalid tell his friend anything before he died? Did he hint at what he had seen? "No, he was normal," she lied. "He just went to sleep and never woke up." Sadiq hesitated. Then, in a lower voice, he said, "Auntie, Khalid was angry that day. He told me he found out something that would change everything." Mariam's breath hitched. What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "I don't know." Sadiq shook his head. "He wouldn't tell me. He just said he didn't know what to do." Mariam felt cold sweat form on her back. Sadiq leaned forward. "Auntie, did he tell you what was wrong?" Mariam forced herself to remain calm. She reached out and patted his hand, her voice soft and broken. "Sadiq, my son is gone. Please, let's not torture ourselves with questions we can't answer." Sadiq studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "I just miss him," he whispered. "So do I, my dear," Mariam replied, her voice hollow. But as Sadiq left, she knew the truth. He wasn't convinced. For the next few weeks, Mariam lived in paranoia. She barely slept. She barely ate. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every glance from a neighbor made her stomach twist. She kept imagining the police coming for her, dragging her away, exposing the truth. And Adana, she had disappeared. Mariam had tried calling her, but Adana never picked up. She had sent messages, pleading, panicking, but there was no response. Did Adana regret everything? Did she feel guilty? Or worse, did she plan to confess? Mariam's paranoia grew into obsession. She started checking the news, waiting for any mention of Khalid's death being reopened. She listened carefully in the market, at the mosque, in school, trying to hear if anyone suspected her. But for now, the secret was safe. Still, she knew one thing for certain. Secrets never stayed buried forever. And hers was a ticking time bomb. Mariam had convinced herself that she was safe. Weeks passed, then months, and no one questioned Khalid's death beyond whispers of how sudden and tragic it was. The fear that had gripped her began to fade, until the night everything came crashing down. It was late when the knock came. Mariam had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the sharp rap on her door jolted her upright. Her heart pounded. Who would visit at this hour? She hesitated before rising, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and moving cautiously to the door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. It was Adana. She looked different, her eyes hollow, her face tense. But what sent a wave of terror through Mariam was the expression she wore. It wasn't sadness. It was anger. "We need to talk," Adana said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Mariam closed the door, her fingers trembling. "Adana, where have you been? I tried calling you. You killed him, didn't you?" Adana's voice was ice cold. Mariam froze. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. She opened her mouth to deny it, to say something, anything, but no words came out. Adana scoffed. "I knew you were desperate, Mariam, but I never thought you'd kill your own son." Tears welled up in Mariam's eyes. "I didn't have a choice." Adana's jaw clenched. "Yes, you did. You could have talked to him. You could have let him go. But instead, you smothered your own child to protect yourself." Mariam shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. If he had told anyone..." "So what?" Adana snapped. "You were scared, so you murdered him?" Mariam's breath came in shallow gasps. She had spent so much time justifying what she had done that hearing it said out loud, like this, made her stomach churn. Adana stepped closer, her voice lower now. "I couldn't sleep, Mariam. I kept thinking about him. I kept seeing his face. And then I heard rumors. Sadiq has been asking questions. People are starting to wonder." Mariam's hands clenched into fists. "No one knows anything." "Not yet," Adana said. "But they will." Mariam's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" Adana exhaled, crossing her arms. "I can't live with this. And I won't protect you." Mariam's eyes widened. "You wouldn't." Adana stared at her for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I already have." A chill ran down Mariam's spine. What do you mean?" Adana swallowed hard. "I went to the police." Mariam felt the room tilt. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. "No," she whispered. "I didn't tell them everything," Adana said. "But I told them that Khalid's death wasn't natural. That they should take another look." Mariam's breathing became ragged. "Adana, do you realize what you've done?" "Yes." Adana's voice was steady. "I did what you should have done from the beginning. I told the truth." Mariam staggered back, gripping the wall for support. It was over. Her darkest secret was about to be exposed. The morning sun cast long shadows over Mariam's house. But inside, darkness consumed her. She sat in her living room, motionless, her hands tightly clasped together as she waited. It was only a matter of time now. She had barely slept since Adana's visit. Every knock on the door, every passing car made her heart lurch with panic. She had considered running, packing a bag and disappearing into another city. But where would she go? Who would take her in? She was trapped. Then it happened. A loud knock shattered the silence. Mariam's breath hitched. She didn't move. Maybe if she stayed still, they would go away. But then, another knock, louder this time. And a voice. "Mariam Hassan, this is the police. Open the door." Her body felt detached from her mind as she stood up, her legs wobbling beneath her. She opened the door slowly, and there they were. Two officers in uniform, their expressions unreadable. Behind them, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. "Madam," one of the officers said, his tone firm but calm. "We have a warrant to take you in for questioning regarding the death of your son, Khalid Hassan." The world around Mariam seemed to spin. She shook her head, her voice weak. "No, it was a mistake. He just died in his sleep." The officer's expression remained neutral. "Please come with us." She wanted to beg. She wanted to scream. But she knew it was useless. As the officers placed cold metal handcuffs around her wrists, she heard gasps from the crowd. The shame burned through her like fire. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw her. Adana stood at a distance, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She had been the one to end it all. Mariam's lips trembled. "How could you?" Adana didn't reply. As the officers led Mariam away, the whispers from the crowd grew louder. Neighbors who once greeted her with respect now stared in shock and disgust. She had spent her whole life building a reputation. And now, in an instant, it was gone. The investigation moved quickly. The police exhumed Khalid's body, and an autopsy revealed what had truly happened. The bruising around his face, the signs of suffocation, the undeniable proof of murder. Mariam sat in the courtroom, her hands gripping the edges of the defendant's table. She barely heard the prosecutor's words, barely registered the evidence presented against her. But she felt the weight of Adana's testimony. Adana took the stand, her voice steady as she told the court about the night Khalid died, about Mariam's fear of being exposed, about her desperate confession. Mariam stared at her, eyes filled with betrayal, but Adana never looked at her. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty. As the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, Mariam's body went limp. Life imprisonment. Her world was over. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, she saw Adana one last time. For a moment, their eyes met. Mariam searched for regret in Adana's face, for hesitation, for any sign that she still cared. But all she saw was sorrow. And then, just like that, Adana turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Mariam closed her eyes, allowing herself to be led away. Her judgment day had come, and there was no escaping it.